Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Presence. I am Doug King, your host, and I am very excited today to be joined by Dr. Riane Eisler, who you have heard about in the previous newsletters. I've sent you her bio, I've recommended her books, and now she has been kind enough to invest time to speak directly to and with our audience. So, Riane, welcome so much to this conversation.
Well, thank you, Doug, and it's such a pleasure to be with you and to talk about the matters that are so dear to both of us, values.
Yes, values. And that really is that word's really great entree into the discussion today. And we've got so many good things to talk about. I'll jump right in it. And maybe this would be a good starting point, if you will, to talk about the distinction that you're making and bringing awareness to between hierarchies of domination and hierarchies of actualization. The first would be part of what research would identify as domination systems, meaning hierarchies of domination. The second is being characteristic of what research identifies as part of the configuration of partnership systems. And those are based more on linking rather than ranking. So maybe we can start with the history. Riane, you do a brilliant job of this in Chalice and Blade, and denominating teachings that have really distorted even the teachings of Jesus, as well as those in other religions. So could you just tell us a bit about how you see those two, hierarchy versus actualization, how that's all playing out?
Well, they're both hierarchies because a partnership organization doesn't have to be completely flat. But in a hierarchy of domination, well, it's really based on fear, on obedience of order, top-down orders, and the consequences are dire, including even death in more rigid domination times. Whereas hierarchies of actualization really are empowering rather than disempowering. It's interesting that we're beginning to hear about empowering, right? Which doesn't belong in domination systems at all. It's a new word, it's part of the movement of consciousness, of society to the partnership side of what I call the partnership domination social scale. So when we're talking about a hierarchy of domination, accountability, respect, benefit, they just flow from the bottom up, don't they?
Yes.
In other words, that's really gaining transparency, accountability. They don't belong in domination systems. I mean, the only people who are supposed to be transparent, to be accountable, are those on bottom. Are those on top, the quote divinely ordained right of kings to rule, or the divinely ordained right of men to rule over women and children in the quote castles of their homes, or the quote divinely ordained right of a so-called superior race to rule over a so-called inferior one. These, and even the environmental movement is challenging these traditions of domination, challenging our conquest and domination of nature, which was in the old paradigm of domination, and we've inherited a lot of this, okay? But we're trying to free ourselves of it. What we're saying now is, hey, this conquest and domination of nature, it's going to take us at our level of technology, at our level of population to an evolutionary dead end. We need to find a different paradigm. And this is really all about values, isn't it?
Yes, very much about values. And for our audience, because the narrative that we draw from for universal values is the biblical narrative. And because we reinterpret much of the scripture to move into a more universal realm, we can trace, and we've talked many times in our podcast, Riane, about the history of Christianity, because that's most associated with the biblical narrative, of course, as well as Judaism. But most of our followers have come from Christianity, and we realize that the idea of that you're talking about, partnership societies and families, is not defined as either Catholic or Protestant or Calvinism, Arminianism, but rather these are embedded paradigms that really have affected all walks of life, religious or even non-religious, and that this is something we have not given really a lot of thought to. So this is why we're talking about this as a universal value.
Well, and the universal values that I talk about in my work are really the distinction between the values inherent in domination systems and the values inherent in partnership systems. And as you know, Doug, these categories transcend the old social categories that we've been taught, like religious or secular or capitalist or socialist or east and west or right and left. It goes back to what we have come to think about, some of us, as core values, core partnership values. I mean, what did Jesus preach? He really preached partnership teachings like love, mutuality, respect, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. His community and the first Christian communities, they were partnership communities that valued peace and nonviolence, equality, including linking rather than ranking of male and female. They valued hierarchies of actualization rather than domination. I mean, Jesus really talked about equality and mutual respect in both the family and the community, about gender equity, about no need for a high degree of built-in abuse and violence, which is, of course, needed to impose and maintain hierarchies of domination in all institutions. And one of the differences between the research that I draw from and the conventional approach is that it is more inclusive, it is more holistic, it looks at the effect of the family as well as of politics and economics, and of course also at the effect of religion, because what we have in religion is, unfortunately, we have this core of partnership values, of, if you will, more feminine in conventional wisdom, in domination systems, wisdom, you know, the caring, nonviolence, love, and this is really fundamental, that we can't reclaim these values unless we also look at gender.
Yes, and that kind of brings me to the big paradigm shift that you are presenting in this discussion, and you do it through the 4 cornerstones of your work. We'll talk more about that. I'd kind of like to start with reminding everybody in the audience who has, again, had our newsletters and seen the video that you and I have done for the evolutionary leaders, but to just remind everybody who may not have seen all the material, your 4 cornerstones are childhood, gender, economics, and language or story. So maybe we could start with any comments you would like to make about gender. It's the second one. I start with it, Riane. The reason for our audience is because we are very familiar with the fact, as we mentioned in our video previously, that gender really determined who had the authority in religion as the story begins. I mean, you had the male king, you had the male priest and priesthood and so forth. And then when we get to Jesus, Jesus is proposing a shift, a paradigm shift that you just described. So maybe you could say whatever else you wanted to say about gender, and then then I'd also like to move next into childhood. Do you have any other comments you'd like to make about gender?
Very definitely. We have been taught, and all of us carry this, that gender, well, that's just a women's issue. That's just an ancillary, secondary issue. Actually, gender is a key social issue. Why? Think about it for just a moment. There are two forms in humanity. Of course, we now know that there are people in between, which is absolutely against domination systems where they're very rigid gender stereotypes. Okay, this is what men do, and it's basically male identity is not being like a woman, not being soft, not being caring, not doing caregiving work, etc., nonviolence, etc. That's not real masculinity. So what I'm really getting at is that we have to sort of shift our lens on gender. Now, why do our scriptures have this strange, when you think about it, ranking of male and with it so-called masculine over female and so-called feminine? Well, because they came out of, and this is where history comes in. And I'm so glad that you're bringing that out, Doug, because really we're talking about a history in which the domination system was already in firm place.
Yeah.
The shift happened in our prehistory. It happened long before the Hebrews. They already inherited this, but Jesus came along, and interestingly, even though the scriptures were, of course, revised and changed to fit into these more domination molds, he said, there's, as Paul said, no female, no male, we're all one. Now, he stopped the stoning of a woman for adultery. He associated freely with women, which in his time was big heresy.
Yeah.
He really challenged one of the cornerstones right there, the ranking of male over female, and he certainly challenged the ranking of so-called real masculinity, conquest, domination, over so-called femininity, caring, caregiving, nonviolence. And I say so-called because this is not a question of women against men or men against women. It's really ridding ourselves and leaving behind these rigid gender stereotypes, which happens only, frankly, as the status of women rises. Then men can embrace what is labeled, quote, feminine in themselves. And I happen to have been married for 45 years to a wonderful, caring man. Yes, a caring man. This is not a matter of anything inherent in women and men. It is a matter of domination systems.
Yeah, and what I love about what you're saying here is that this is not an anti-male message, meaning radical feminism in that sense. You are saying, no, what we want is a partnership of male, female, and that's the paradigm shift that you're calling for. And that's the beauty of unity. which is the value that all the evolutionary leaders are seeking. It's a value found in the biblical narrative. Unity is a big value. So what you're saying when you say partnership, you're talking unity, and that's the beauty of what you're calling for in terms of a call to action, if you will. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I do want to say one thing. When you equate radical feminism with being anti-male, that has been a media interpretation that has been really ascribing. There are many kinds of feminism, and there are certainly some women, including some feminists, who really have had horrible experiences with men and who are very angry about this. But let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, is what I'm trying to say. Because what feminism really is about elevating.
Yes.
Elevating women and the so-called feminists. I
Yes.
mean, and I think that, again, it's not us against them.
Right.
It's all of us really looking at what makes people thrive, what makes people survive. And it isn't domination. It isn't winning and losing. It isn't dominating or being dominated. But that's what that model of our species teaches, isn't it?
Yes.
Why is gender so important? Because really there are these forms. Children know that there are these forms. And what they learn is to equate difference, beginning with this fundamental difference in our species, with superiority and inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving. And then they have a template for in-group versus out-group, everything, racism, anti-Semitism, Shia versus Sunni or Sunni versus Shia. It doesn't, anti-immigrant. I mean, it's always the other, the enemy. It's fear-based. And as I said, domination systems, hierarchies of domination are fear-based.
Yes, and you mentioned it begins in childhood, which is really the first cornerstone. And my wife and I, Danae, who everyone in presence is well aware of her work, really appreciate the fact that when you're talking about a cornerstone, childhood is truly the cornerstone for where all of us started. We share that start. Is there any other comments you'd like to say in terms of educational projects or other things that you're pushing for to change the paradigms that have typically been embedded in childhood teachings?
Well, there is, as you know, this movement today towards from domination to partnership, from authoritarian, violent. Yes, because spanking is violent, slapping is violent. I mean, come on, you know, this distinction that we make, that we've been taught to make, that no, this is not violence, this is sound discipline, that's nonsense. And the American Psychological Association finally a few years ago came out and said, look, spanking is not only ineffective as a means of discipline, but it is physically and emotionally harmful. Because what do children learn? They learn that it's okay for somebody to use violence, somebody in control, right? To use violence to impose their will on others. So if we talk about peace, that you can't teach children, I mean, this is called cognitive dissonance, to say, oh, let's be peaceful, but oh, let's punish children by spanking them or hitting them or worse. And neuroscience, I mean, this is the point now. Yes, you can sort of say, well, psychology, you know, has long shown this. But today we know from neuroscience, biological science, that what children observe or experience in their first 5 years is crucial to nothing less than how our brains develop. And with it, how we think, how we feel, how we act, including how we vote. So but all of these cornerstones that you mentioned, childhood, gender, economics, and story language, they're all interconnected.
Yes, what you are presenting is what we would call holistic, as in WHOL, holistic approach. And I mentioned in the last video we did, the synergy circle that I'm in is regarding holistic cosmologies. And that's another subject for another day. But you also just mentioned briefly as you went through that, the third cornerstone of economics. And I found in reading your work some really fascinating things I hadn't considered before about economics as part of this holistic approach. Could you please share with us some of your ideas about that third cornerstone?
Well, look, none of us have been taught to think this way. I mean, let's really go back to the conventional categories, right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, capitalist, socialism. A colleague of mine calls them weapons of mass distraction because they really fragment our consciousness. And let's look at the whole for a moment. And yes, let's take gender and childhood into account when we look at economics, because this gendered system of values, remember we were talking about how it was superimposed in the scriptures, there's these core teachings of caring and do unto others as you would have them do unto. I mean, it wasn't only Jesus, it was Isaiah who's the first one who said, not the first one, I'm sure, but in the Bible, we already read that Isaiah said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is really empathy, isn't it? It is something that women are supposed to have, right? Mm-hmm. So this gendered system of values, which elevates, well, look, there's always money for prisons in the United States. And who's that? What's that? That's the punitive male head of the household, of the family. Punishing. I mean, Jesus didn't talk about punishment. I mean, somehow later on in the so-called New Testament, we get into this awful thing about, Armageddon, and God knows what that means, because I don't really think, I think you're right, it means something completely different. Yeah. But there it is, Yeah. And really, one of the projects that you and I have talked about is using the partnership domination social scale, this lens, to sort the chaff, which is this overlay of domination teachings, from the grain, from the core wisdom, from really what we want. But getting back to the gender system of values and economics, look, as I said, there's always money for prisons, Mm-hmm. There's always money for weapons, for wars, the hero as the violent killer in the name of justice and law, and I don't know what else, right? But somehow consider that there isn't enough money to nurture children, to feed children. I mean, women's work, right? Anything labeled feminine, caring, caregiving, it's devalued. And so in my book, as you know, The Real Wealth of Nations, I point out that both capitalism and socialism leave out as part of the productive part of economics, the three life-sustaining sectors: the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. For both Marx and for Smith, nature is just there to be exploited. There's nothing about caring for our natural life support systems. As for the work of caring for people starting at birth, for them that was to be done for free, by a woman in a male-controlled household. Now go back to the biblical narrative. that was firmly embedded. I mean,
Yes.
the male Abraham could kill his son. I mean, the whole notion that a father should be able to kill his offspring is nuts, really. But there you have it. And that is the domination overlay.
Yes.
So we need to sort it. We need to sort these two things. And unfortunately, so many people who consider themselves Christians have glommed up to what really is domination religion rather than partnership religion.
Yes, and Danae is working with some women right now, some of whom have gone into podcasting, who come from fundamentalist backgrounds, and who are now talking about all of the things they were taught about being female. And it really even gets to the point of the abusive. And I know that that's not true of all Christians. I'm not trying to make a blanket statement, but I'm saying that there's a real awakening taking place in light of what you're saying and have been saying for many decades, which is encouraging. And that really kind of brings us to that fourth cornerstone of story. And one of the things that we found in presence is that when you are going up against an embedded paradigm and you are reinterpreting the nature of a hierarchy in terms of partnership rather than dominator, you're really going up against an empire based on thought and consciousness. And it takes a lot of courage in many cases to be willing to be a pioneer, to step forward and to do that. And I'm sure you've run into that as you have traveled worldwide. Even when you did work in Russia, I read during the Yeltsin administration. But maybe say a word or two about the need we have today in terms of reinterpreting the story into this new story of partnership.
And this is fundamental. And again, the four cornerstones, I repeat, are interconnected: childhood, gender, economics. I mean, what do we reward in a way that puts a roof over our heads and food on the table? It isn't caring, hasn't been. Some of the more partnership-oriented nations, contemporary nations like Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, they pioneered paid parental leave. They pioneered really very professional, accessible. I mean, why do we insist that a plumber be trained but not a child care worker? I mean, what's more important, for goodness sakes? Our pipes or our children?
Yeah.
But we've been so conditioned by this gendered system of values that and so I'm saying let's just think for a moment about how we look, and let's use this partnership domination social scale. And what did you just ask me? I'm sorry.
What you're doing is you're moving. We talk about at present a global conversation for a new earth, but a global conversation must necessarily be for the purpose of bringing about global action. And so one of the things I was saying was that when you're going up against embedded paradigms, especially if they go against someone else's authority, this becomes a very difficult conversation, because if you are the person with authority and the power in those hierarchies, you're not too excited about someone challenging that. And I was just saying that you represent to me a person who is calling for the courage of all people to stand up and to begin to do what they can to take part in this partnership approach. And it takes courage to do that.
Well, it takes courage and it takes a lot of persistence. But there are people today in positions of, quote, authority who are changing how they view authority. And that's the beginning. And we're back to hierarchies of domination and hierarchies of actualization. If you will, the title of the first book that introduced this way of looking, well, this worldview, that the struggle for our future is not between right and left, religious and secular, Eastern and Western. I mean, there have been terrible, repressive, oppressive, violent regimes in every one of these categories. Look at the early so-called Christian church that allied itself with the Roman Empire and started to kill all its rivals. I mean, come on, you know. This is not a question of these categories. But look, the thing that I'm trying to do is to change the worldview, help us, because it's been a process for me, a kind of a consciousness awakening, if you will. And I know woke has become, a terrible word. It's kind of a ridiculous word because it's not grammatical to be woke. But yes, we need to wake up from what I call the domination trance.
Yes.
And that once we start waking up and see that there is a better alternative, that look, like, remember I mentioned nations that have moved more to the partnership side, where, for example, talk about gender, women are almost 50% of the national legislatures, which makes it possible for men to also embrace more caring policies because they're associated with women. But they are always at the top ranks, not only of the World Happiness Reports, but of the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Reports. I mean, this works, for goodness sakes. And they're not socialist. They are, and I repeat this, they are not, this socialist has become, the anything that you don't like is socialist, right?
Right.
They call themselves very often caring societies, and they have a very healthy market economy precisely because they have caring policies that invest in people, in human capacity, which starts in early childhood. I mean, this is not so difficult. It is, once you really sort of get it, that, hey, we have been in something of a trance. And these are the realities. It just makes sense, doesn't it?
Makes perfect sense. And I'd kind of like to conclude today by taking some time for you to be able to explain that beyond your writing, your call to action has led to the Center for Partnership Systems. Could you share with the audience the Center for Partnership Systems and other work you do that is actually calling forth activism on our part?
Yes, well, I've always felt that what we need is what Kurt Lewin, who's the father really of social psychology, called action research. And by that I mean research that is not just counting the angels in the head of a pin, so to speak, but research that helps us move forward. And that is what I'm interested in. Now, we at the Center for Partnership Systems have developed some resources, and they're available online for free as our consulting services to help organizations with whatever they're trying to achieve. One of them, of course, is for families, and we have the Caring and Connected Parenting Guide, very short, very concise, based on the latest neuroscience to help us shift from authoritarian, violent parenting to authoritative. Remember, you've heard that word. Because kids do need some modeling. They need, but it isn't, the domination parenting, as in the so-called Christian parenting guides, is and they say this, showing a child starting at way when they're babies, that the parents' world is law. Now, why? Putin in 2018 substantially lowered the penalty for family violence. So it's less now. So then if you hit or hurt or kill a woman or a child or a man in the, outside of the family, it's less than if you do it in the family. He gets the connection between an authoritarian, highly punitive, rigidly male-dominated family and that kind of state or tribe. And so do the Taliban, and so did Hitler in Nazi Germany, and so did Khomeini, so did Khomeini and his successors in Iran, so did Stalin, leftist in the former Soviet Union. But getting back, I always want to tell you everything, it seems. But another resource that we have is the Partnership Technology Toolkit and Workbook. And this can actually be used not only it's a questionnaire to really examine what are the values that our company or our technology or our team or I am actually consciously or unconsciously maintaining, promoting, pushing, because we're talking about a change in values, aren't we?
Yes.
Which is really happening, but not everywhere. And not coincidentally, of course, as I said, people who are brought up in an authoritarian, rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family are much more likely to vote for a, quote, strongman ruler and to think in terms of in-group versus out-groups than those who are not. So that's why this is really such an important cornerstone. So, but you can find that on our website, those two resources on our website at centerforpartnership.org. Also, and I really highly recommend these, and you might want to use them, Doug, and then put them in context of what your organization is doing. We have online, on-demand courses. And once you take the course, for example, there's a course called Changing Our Story, Changing Our Lives. And there are 4 videos, which are narrated by me with lots of visuals on where are we, how did we get here? Because what we didn't mention is that for millennia, we oriented as a species in our cultures more to the partnership side. And this has been well documented by archaeology, anthropology, by DNA studies even, but it has yet to really be out there center stage. And it's up to us to bring it out there. So this course, I really urge people to take because it has a lot of resources then for action. And we're working, because we used to do our courses at a certain time, online in a certain place. And we realized that, no, they have to be on demand online because, we're international and also national. So we're working on a course on a caring economics of partnerism, which, yes, of course, we need a free market. We don't happen to have one. And we need enlightened government policies. We have to go beyond that in our economic system to really recognize the economic value of caring for people starting at birth, especially in our post-industrial knowledge service age, and also, of course, caring for our natural life support systems, which, as I said, neither capitalism nor socialism. I mean, we're trying to tack on those values, but it doesn't work. You have to change the values that are guiding values. So always back to values.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And just again, a reminder for everyone, you found the link to this video you're watching right now in the newsletter that we send out, which goes to people in many different countries, I think now maybe 30. And in this, we have put the link to Center for Partnership Systems. It's a great website. So go to that link and check it out and look at the principles that Riane has laid out here, the importance of them, and even the courses that she's talking about, where a lot of things that, again, you start out as the subject of a paradigm, meaning you think that's just the way it is. And it takes this shift to be able to look at it from an objective standpoint. And that's what this coursework really helps people to do. So, Riane, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but generally people don't like to watch a 7 or 8 hour video. So I'm going to wrap it up here just by simply saying on behalf of Presence how much we appreciate your lifelong dedication and the lifelong dedication of your husband, Tom, and the partnership that you and Tom.
David, it's my husband, David.
I'm sorry. I don't know where I got that. Again, that's because I just turned 71. And so I think hopefully everybody will excuse me for saying that. I don't know where I got that from Tom. But for the marriage that you all and partnership that you all have modeled, and even his work in systems, which
well,
people
he did so much work in reclaiming morality. You know, we've given away family, we've given away morality, and he wrote tomes. I mean, David Loye, L-O-Y-E.
Yeah.
He wrote on moral sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote books on reclaiming Darwin, who has been totally misinterpreted. Yes. And I also wanted to say one thing. There are some wonderful graphics that show the configuration of the partnership system and the domination system, that show what really do we mean by caring economics of partnerism, that you can find on the website. So lots and lots of resources.
Lots of resources, great resources. And again, just want to thank you on behalf of all of our group here that you would take some time out of your most busy schedule and say how much we appreciated your lifelong work, Riane. Thank you so much for joining our global conversation.
Well, thank you, Doug, and keep up your good work.
Thank you. We're all in it together. And speaking
Yes.
of that, folks, next week, Danae's going to join me. Look, if this is a partnership society, how could I leave my partner out of this series? Danae's going to help me wrap up this series we're doing on Riane's work in our next video that we see next week after this. And Danae is specifically going to bring content regarding the first cornerstone of childhood. And Danae has some great material in the way she's using it to start off as a family. We have 4 kids and 5 grandkids. And so she's going to come in as my partner with a lot of information that has really been educational for me. She works in an area that's more individually oriented, not worldview. And her individual work on raising a family and all these things that Riane's brought up is what Danae's going to talk about as we, again, re-emphasize in this series this much needed paradigm for a better world. As Desmond Tutu was saying about Riane Eisler's work, that it is a template for the world we so urgently need. That's a pretty good recommendation. So join us next time. Thanks again, Riane, and we'll see you all then. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.